places, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Unsung. I thank you very much for being here. Today in the studio, I have a guy, him and I go back a little bit, and we have what I estimate are some of the best conversations two people could have. They are typically, I mean, in some ways, him and I align, I think, 100%. In a few ways, we don't. We'll probably get down to a little bit of that, but this is also an exercise into how to dialogue correctly. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dave Lake. Dave, how you doing, brother?
Good, Gavin. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you dropping by the studio, man.
Yeah, of course, anytime.
Yeah. This is good, and we've talked about this for a while.
Yeah, it's been kind of on the books for a bit of time, hasn't it? Like,
yeah,
we're always mentioning it, and finally you just
and we're doing it, and I'm so glad we're doing it.
Yeah.
It's exciting to me.
Yeah, me too.
And you know, like they said in Vietnam, we'll probably get into the shit.
Sure.
But to begin with, I just want to ask you some questions because
Sure.
even though we go back a little ways, when you were playing drums at what's the church?
First Assembly.
Right. That's kind of where I met you, and you know that's where I realized there was a guy, Dave Lake, that played drums.
Yeah.
And so, what about the drums, man? Where did all that come from?
You know, I don't know. Like it's one of those things that just kind of appears. You know, like I remember when it happened. I was a kid. We were at church in a small town in BC where we lived when I was young. And the guy who played drums for the church was just, you know, this giant kid who looked so cool, and it was just this thing, and it was cool. It might have just been that, like it's one of those things that's hard to say where the genesis comes from, like what sparks it, what the event is that sparks it, or what
what that moment is.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's, you can't pin it down, but I do remember it, and then it just kind of grew from there, and then I just started kind of noodling around.
So would you say that it was an optical thing that first?
Yeah, you know what?
Kind of got you.
You're probably right. That's probably what it was. It just looked cool because it was giant. Like it was the biggest drum kit I've ever seen, or I had ever seen. You know,
right? Double?
No, but he had. I mean, he was probably pushing, or he's probably using. I don't know, at least 3 or 4 up, 2 down. You know, like lots of toms.
Yeah.
Lots of cymbals. You know. Wicked angles in the cymbals, all that kind of stuff, right? Like all the really kind of like woohoo, far out kind of.
Right. Are we talking early 80s?
No, this would have been early 90s.
Early 90s,
yeah.
Okay.
So, so I just thought it was the coolest looking thing, right? And then after the service, I kind of wandered over to look at it, and I got yelled at from across the room. Not yelled at, but I just heard somebody from across the room, "Please don't touch those."
Oh yeah.
Okay. So then, and then I was in a little town called Castlegar in BC.
Yep.
I lived there for a couple of years when I was younger, and then a couple of years after that, we moved to Cranbrook, and that's when I actually started to do something with it. Right. So the funny story that I always like to tell is me and a couple of buddies would always come to church on Sunday morning, and we'd always sit in the back, and we'd always just whisper and laugh and talk and generally disrupt everything that was going on around us. So the youth pastor at the time, because we were maybe 12 or 13, or no, probably 14 or 15. Anyway, the youth pastor around that time looked at us and basically said, "You guys need something to do." So, you know, because we were being, you know, little shits, kind of, right? We were just being disruptive. So,
now, would he have used the terminology "little shits"?
No, of course not.
I didn't think so.
No, I didn't. He probably wouldn't even use it today. But, but that's generally that's what we were. Is we were just being disruptive. So, so he comes. So he took us, brought us in. I can't remember exactly how it went down, but he brought us into the church basement at one point and said, "This is a set of drums," and then I was the only one that took to it. And then I was playing there, like I started playing on stage there, and then we moved to Calgary, and I kind of started getting plugged in a little bit.
And how old would you have been at that point?
Probably 15. When because I was 16 when we moved here to Calgary. So at that point, it would have been, I was probably about 15 or so. And then played for a little bit there, like on stage there, until we moved away.
So would you say that you fell in love with the drums, or you fell in love with music, or how would you put it? How did you feel about that?
That's interesting. I don't know if I would use the term love. I thought it was cool. It was fun. It got me noticed, as those things tend to do.
Right.
But I didn't like deep dive into the instrument. I liked listening to music, but I didn't get obsessive with it. In a way that kind of defines how you approach the instrument, right?
Sure.
So,
sure.
But I mean, I played a lot. I enjoyed it. I learned. I taught.
Kind of a deep like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Can we say it that way?
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, because you intrigued me by one of your statements, and I hope you don't mind me asking. But did you feel that was kind of a need for you back then? Like you said, it got you noticed. Was that a good thing for you? Yeah,
it was a good thing, but it wasn't something that I was craving, but it was something that I realized I didn't really have. It's one of those things that you only ever notice that it's there, or that it's not there until you get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like you realize that it actually exists.
It actually exists, and now that it's being applied to me, it's like, oh, that's interesting. Okay.
It's kind of like TV. If there were no TVs, you wouldn't miss them.
Yeah, exactly.
But the fact that we know there's a TV.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so we could do a lot of jumping around and stuff like that, but I do want to tackle something because it's on my mind. It's right here. It's fresh in the moment, and that is church.
As soon as you called me up and said, "Hey, let's do this podcast," I thought, "Fuck, we're going to talk about church all night, aren't we?"
No, we're going to talk about a lot of things, because we do. But I thought, seeing that we're there, why don't we tackle that, and then we can, politely fuck off from that. But I would like to, because you and I both have a history there, right? I played for Jimmy Swaggart. 18, I think. I started going to church, and it wasn't in my family history, that's for sure. But I ended up going, and I went to Rosebud. That's where I got Jesus, and so from there, it was up until my 40s. It was kind of the thing, although I was never the poster child for it. I can assure you of that. It was a big part of my life, and it was a big part of your life.
We can smell our own in that.
What's that?
He said it's not, it wasn't, you weren't the poster boy for it. I'm like, yeah, I know, we can smell our own.
Right? Yeah. I think that's why you and I connect, brother.
Yeah, exactly.
But, so let me ask you this. I mean, where do you put, faith, religion, church, these kind of things? What did they mean to you growing up? And what do they mean to you now? Is there any difference in them?
There's a huge difference in them. But let me put a pin in that. Just to just kind of level set with just bring it into context. I went to church because I had to go to church. Like so many kids that grew up in the church, you went to church because your parents took you to church, right? That's plain and simple. It was the music that kept me there. Like, it was playing drums that kept me there because, in a kind of cynical way of thinking about it, it was a good gig. It was a good, steady gig. And I didn't want to give up a good, steady gig, right? So in order to tackle that question about the difference between faith and church and all that stuff, I think it's important to understand that I grew up in a standard issue evangelical Pentecostal church, which, although they won't say it, sometimes I felt, and I'm being diplomatic when I say this, but sometimes I felt that they demand more of your expression of faith than a lot of other places do, or a lot of other types of denominations do.
Right, they demand more of it. Could you say, in a sense, that they demand more of it than you actually feel like giving?
Well, and that's the root of it. At the end of the day, what took me away from it at the end of all of this, and I'm jumping ahead when I say this, is the fact that it wasn't. They were asking me to be somebody else. That's just. You know, they were asking me to be something else, but they wanted. I mean, I could tell that there, at least with some people, there was a sincere desire for me to have more. More. What do you mean when you say more? More Jesus, more God. You know, all of the standard issue, you know, boilerplate stuff that churches like that say. And I mean, I don't necessarily have the articulation to really get in depth about what that means, because sometimes you got to wonder if that requires a religious education of some kind, but
right, or a suspending of reality,
or exactly,
yeah.
or even that, yeah. Exactly. But at the end of the day, I wasn't that person. So that doesn't necessarily mean that I was kicked out of the church. That just means that I wasn't fit to be on stage.
From their point of view.
From their point of view.
Right.
So.
And that's why a lot of people censor themselves too, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Oh,
you know, like I have some buddies, and of course, you know, don't have to worry about who they are.
Yeah.
But I have some buddies that spent a lot of years in church,
mm-hmm.
in roles in church, not believing shit.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
But, you know, I mean, hey, right? You want to keep yourself safe. You want to, you have a job, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But then wouldn't that just belie a certain inauthenticity to the person themselves, which is something that ultimately, if Christ exists, he wouldn't want to begin with?
Well, that's just it. I mean, if you're in there and you're going through the motions simply because it's a good gig, or simply because it's what you do and it's safe and it's comfortable, or whatever your reason is, if all you're doing is just going through the motion and you're not actually in it, and you're not believing in it, and it's not, you know, enriching you in a meaningful way, then why are you doing it? You know?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know, you know, do you mind if I interject?
Yeah.
You know, just to say that I think religion did do me some good. I mean, I was a pretty bad kid.
Yeah,
you know?
Sure, yeah.
So religion, Christianity, whatever, if you want to call it, did me some good. Mm-hmm. You know, it gave me a certain ideology, because before then I had none.
Yeah.
Except, you know, smoking dope and playing drums, you know, which was great, but it didn't seem that sustainable. So I constructed an ideology. Mm-hmm. I think what ended up happening, well, number one, I think there were some things that couldn't be denied that came into my life around a certain point in time. And not only that, but I couldn't live up to the expectation, kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Because, and for whatever your reasons were that you couldn't live up to the expectation, my reasons were is because it's just not who I am, you know. And it reached a certain point where I just felt like I was being pressured to play the game. And I didn't want to play the game anymore, you know. That's plain and simple. That's it.
Well, that kind of begs another question too, and I'll shoot it right at. Then who is Dave Lake?
Well, I mean,
it's not a tough one. Come on.
You just to take you back. You said, you know, you didn't have an ideology except for smoking dope and playing drums. And my first question to you, just in a knee-jerk reaction, is: does a person really need an ideology in order to live and thrive? You know.
Boy, that's a good question.
You know what I mean?
No, that's a great question.
You know, or do we feel that we need an ideology because certain elements of society demand that we have an ideology? Now, that's probably a little bit nihilistic, or I don't even know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean. It's probably a little bit, you know, we believe in nothing type of thing. But
right, nihilist, nihilist.
Yeah. And that's not, and I'm not saying that's who I am. It's just it's an interesting tangent to go on. But who is Dave Lake? I mean, isn't that the question that we struggle with our entire lives?
I think it is.
You know, like people are on their deathbed still asking themselves that question, right? I don't know that I would want to know the answer, because then what else am I living for? You know,
meaning if you have the answer, that might be all there is to it.
Yeah, if I have the answer, then what else is there for me as a person to work towards?
Right.
You know?
Well, you're sort of in luck, because even the best neuroscientists, you know, and spiritual gurus or anybody else, nobody can answer it.
It depends on who you ask, but
well, maybe some people think they have the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right, but we don't.
Yeah.
And I think that's the humility.
Yeah.
You know, like getting into philosophy for me has really kind of served me a certain amount of humility, because I realize, well, not only do I not know nearly as much as I thought I did, but it may be that I don't know anything. Yeah. Now, this is kind of an existential, you know, spoken word I'm going to give here, but, you know, there is the argument that because I can question the fact that I exist, I know I exist. But I don't know that you do.
From that purely theoretical, philosophical standpoint,
yes.
Sure, I get that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I can reach over and I can touch your leg. You know.
Well, absolutely, you could.
It's like the old physics problem. If I take the distance between me and that wall and I divide it by half, and I step that distance, and then I divide the remaining distance by half, or divide it, you know, cut the remaining distance in half, and then step that distance and cut the remaining distance in half and step that distance. Theoretically speaking, I'll never be able to touch that wall.
Right.
But I can go over there and touch it right now.
If you go back in history enough, just how deep those questions went, and the people that asked those questions.
Yeah.
Like Socrates, you know, being like the first philosopher and perhaps the first scientist. It's kind of like what I'm doing right now with the podcast. You know, I mean, I played drums for so many years, did so many things in music and in art, that I've kind of come back to another discipline of mine, which was theater and these sorts of things. So you got out of the church to what? To be the most authentic you felt you could be, or at least to pursue it?
Well, yeah, I was going to say that would be more it. Not necessarily to be the most authentic I could be, but to pursue the most authentic I could be. Because when you spend as many years in the church as somebody like you or I have, there's a certain amount of your identity that starts to get wrapped up in that, and all of that comes with that, right? So I wouldn't call it necessarily a period of withdrawal, but there was a little while there where I wouldn't say I was listless or drifting or anything like that. I wasn't sure, and I mean, it's hard to really articulate this because I didn't necessarily have those conscious conversations with myself, you know, but I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go next, who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. So there was maybe a period of adjustment. But ultimately, when I came out of it, and I mean, I say that like like a drowning man just got his, just finally came up for air. But I just decided to kind of live and just see what happens. Now that's the thing about that, is that only represents one aspect of my life and my identity. It was a big one that kind of shrunk, but it was still only one part. I mean, I have my career, you know, I have a day job, you know, I've been working at that for 20 years. You know?
Right. What do you do?
I do IT project work.
Okay.
For, right now I'm working for an insurance company. Completely different from music, completely different from, you know, from anything kind of church operations related kind of thing, right? But I still had that, you know, I had a lot of friends that, you know, that I didn't have from church that I could still, you know, be friends with, you know, family, all that kind of stuff, right? So a lot of that I was still relatively secure in. So the conversation wasn't necessarily, you know, filled with existential dread, you know, but it was something that I kind of had to sit back and consider. I'm like, do I even want to keep playing drums? You know, I mean, I figured I did, but I also kind of had a thought in the back of my mind, like, is this the thing that you know causes me to hang up my sticks, right? And if it is, did I really ever like playing it in the first place, or was I chasing something else?
Right.
Thankfully, the answer is no. You know, I've kept going because I found some outlets, and I found some new friends and some new opportunities, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I know you're playing a lot these days with Angela Wrigley, right?
Angela Wrigley and Derek Stoll.
Derek Stoll, yeah. I mean, you can't be in better hands.
Yeah, exactly.
In a sense.
Yeah, between those two, So thankfully, you know, like I said, that, you know, the answer to that was no, and you know, I wasn't, you know, I was doing it for not internal validation reasons, but ultimately I was doing it because I loved it. You know,
right.
You know, and
oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. So you do love it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying I never said I don't. I just, the initial, you know, push to it never came from that. Right.
But so in a sense, that's somewhat epiphanal, I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, just the fact that you asked yourself the question, am I doing this out of the mind of Christ? Or am I doing this out of my own desire?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And then, exactly. I mean, because that's kind of the two sides to the question, right? If you're doing it, you know, like you said, out of the mind of Christ, am I doing it because it's something that is only, I don't even know if I want to say that. I was going to say, am I doing it am I doing it only because it's something that's relevant to church, or am I doing it because I want to do it? You know, I would have been very disappointed in myself if the answer had fallen in the other direction, right? And
don't you think that, I mean, drums aside, you sort of ask yourself, well, at least I know I did, I'll speak for myself, that I asked myself asking those questions in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like, you know, what part of my thought process was coming because it was church related, because it was the mind of Christ, and what was really coming from me? What did I really believe? And it was so, for me anyway, it was very freeing when I realized that there were certain questions that I didn't even have to answer.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and that's good, but I had to be reminded, not had to be reminded, but the thing that pushed me in the direction that it pushed me in answering that question is, I looked back and I remember a lot of conflict that I had with my colleagues on stage over the years at church. Primarily, not necessarily like hostility or anything like all of some of it did, because I was a bit of an asshole. But
who, you?
Yeah, no.
Oh, come on.
No.
Dave Lake? I don't think so. Go ahead.
But conflict around the role of the musical expression, specifically in a church setting.
Meaning the servant's heart?
Well, no, meaning is it a tool, a means to an end, or are you doing it because you are worshiping with it? And if the answer is the latter, and I'm not trying to presume anything about anybody, you know, different people that I talked to had different ideas about this, but I did notice a tone in some circumstances where if you're doing it for the latter, despite the fact that you're doing it for the latter, there's no room to explore the expression for what it is within the context of offering it up as worship.
Meaning
you play to a formula. Because everything else is not worshipful. Right.
Right. Well, either formulaic or in a sense you can't on a humanistic level explore the instrument for the necessary wood and fiber nature of it. It's only something that you express to God. You know, I mean, I had my own experience with this. I did a drum clinic in Red Deer once, and a very successful clinic. You know, the guys really digged it. You know, asked some great questions. That was it. The worship leader lady at the end of this asked me what to this day is a question that I consider not only asinine, but one that can't be answered. And she...
And let me guess, she presumed to have the answer?
No, she didn't.
Oh, okay.
But she was very...
Well,
but she was very unhappy that I didn't.
Oh. And, well, that actually gives me a little bit of hope. But anyway.
Amen, brother.
Yeah.
Here was the you know, she said, well, what do you do when and she thought she was being, you know, very... philosophical maybe or spiritual about the question. What do you do when God really gets a hold of you? And you know, what does that mean? You know, what happens?
Like, was she asking what happens to you specifically?
Physically and in the moment, and what does that mean to be encased or, you know,
whatever
in the Spirit of God. And I said, well, I don't know what you're asking. Because I have a job to do. So does God like throw me against the back wall? Well, no, because I have to keep playing. So he probably wouldn't even want to do that. Like, what do you mean when it gets a hold of me? I have to be mindfully aware of what I'm doing in order to continue to do it. So when if you're asking me what kind of warm fuzzy feeling do I get, and does that impact my playing? Yes.
Yeah, maybe, sure.
But it doesn't do anything outside of the fact that physically I am sitting at an instrument doing a job. And she really didn't like that.
No, because there's a real, you know, the whole authentic worship experience and being, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Let's call it overcome by the power of God in the moment. I've seen it so many times on stage. Where the player, and, well, let's just say in general, where the player, whatever the instrument is, just starts going off and doing their own thing. And that's fine. They're generally keeping to the, you know, to the parameters of the song that's being played or whatever's being played in the moment, you know, whether it's just free form whatever or whether it's, you know, a structured song or whatever. They're generally keeping to the framework of that. But they're obviously off in their own little world. They're off, you know, taken by, you know, by the Spirit kind of thing, right? That is generally encouraged until there's a drummer that does it.
Right.
But then also there's been some instances where I've seen people be and it's the worst when it's drummers, because I don't care what you say about how well you play or don't play your instrument. Drums, more often than not, are the most obnoxious instrument on that stage. They just are. And I've come to terms with that, and I've come to, you know, I'm at peace with that and all that kind of fun stuff. But when people are, I've seen instances where people are deliberately obnoxious like that, or they don't play to the room as anybody who's on stage should be playing, you know. But they push back when you, not you, but when it is suggested that they, you know, let's, you know, remember this is this and this is the framework we're operating under, and, you know, they push back and say, well, that's just how I worship.
Well, that's a nice excuse.
And why? And the unspoken question in that statement is, why are you trying to restrict how I worship? So, I I kind of sit on the fence between, like any drummer does, between playing to the framework and playing to the room and playing to the moment, and getting lost in the music as it happens, whether you're at church and you get overcome, or whether you're at a club or at any kind of venue and it's just really, really good and you lose yourself in it. You still, to your point, have to keep to that, basic, this is the job I have to do and I have to do it this way.
Well, in a sense, that's kind of a dictate of the music itself. And I don't like to say genre, but it's
worship music is definitely a genre.
Well, a genre, yes, but it's just a dictate of the music that's being presented to you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, if you're playing a country tune, you're not going to play it like a fusion tune.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole thing about, like what happens to you in the worship side of things, well, outside of a certain paradigm or parameter, to me, that would be psychosis. You know what I mean? Like if I lose myself so deeply, and of course we've both seen this in church, where you can lose yourself to the point where the line is blurred between the actual reality of what a person is feeling and perhaps another part of their nature, which is not necessarily healthy. So what do I do as a drummer? Well, hey, the other thing is that when I played in clubs, and one club especially, Lolita's, the Fusion Trio, the Moving Instant, did a gig there once. Yeah. And to me, it was a Gary Wright Dreamweaver moment. I mean, I took the audience that night on a journey through the cosmos. Yeah. I know I left the building, and I feel that I took some people with me. Yeah. The other guys in the band didn't have that experience that night. They were really frustrated with themselves. They were really focused on them. No, it didn't come back to me like, where the fuck were you? No. It was they. I asked them, I said, did you guys? And they're like, man, I just sucked. And I'm like, no. I had this, and I've never felt that in church.
And that's I don't know if I'm going to sound contradictory when I say that, but that's the goal. Like you want to do that. That's why you're there. That's why you're on stage, is to take people on that journey, and to leave the building and all that kind of stuff. You want to do that, but some of the things that I ran into are the reason why, and church will tell you that the goal is the exact same thing as well. They'll give it a lot more of a structured, they'll wrap it into terms that are very churchy and spiritual and say, this is what God does and moving and blah, 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 blah. But I mean, the mechanics of it is the same. The end goal is the same. You're taking people on a journey, right? The pushback that I've run into a lot of times that really kind of got me frustrated with the whole thing, and part of the reason why, like I said, it ended up being, them asking me to be somebody that I wasn't, or them expecting me to be somebody that I wasn't, is around what does that?
Explain.
Well, the music does that, but there's a lot of people that I know that I've run into, that I've talked to for years and years and years, that will say it's the Holy Spirit that does that.
Right.
Like almost exclusively. Like you're just on stage to present the most milquetoast, boring version of whatever song you're playing, and God will take care of the rest.
Right.
And because God will take care of the rest, there was no incentive to be better. Or there seemed to be less incentive to be better.
Right.
There was some instances where that wasn't necessarily the case, and it seemed kind of, I don't know. But there was, like I said, there was no incentive to be better. There felt like there was no incentive to be better, or at least in the case of me, when I wanted to push that, and when I wanted to impart that a little bit, I got pushback because I'm focusing on the wrong thing.
See, I fashioned it differently, but I can totally understand how someone could interpret that way. For me, it was this funny thing that I had in my head that, do everything you can do and God will take care of the rest. So if I haven't done everything I can, and so I got hyper vigilant, you know what I mean? It was Gary Chafee and Gary Chester and Alan Dawson, and not that that's bad. I mean, my God, the best drummers in the world, that's where they come from. So I had no problem with that, except that the God will take care of the rest part.
Yeah, I know.
Because my vision of what that looked like never really came to be.
I know.
Right.
And I mean, at the end of the day, you're like any side man. You know, you're there to realize somebody else's vision. And I'm speaking specifically to the band leader on the stage at the time.
And a certain construct of music itself, because in the fusion trio, that was a totally different thing.
There's absolutely, I'm telling you right now, you know this, there's absolutely nothing about worship music that is that complex and intricate. So
no.
So
although I tried to make it that way.
And I can only imagine how well that was. But I mean, it's the band leader on stage, and it's his vision that drives, you know, everybody forward, you know, through the worship experience. You're just a sideman. So in that sense, you know, maybe I was, you know, pushing a little bit too much. Who knows? Maybe I just didn't know when to shut up and, you know my place. But eventually what happened is I just kind of settled into, you know, a coasting mechanism. I was just kind of coasting along in my playing.
So like, okay, I'll be a good boy.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'll be a good boy. I'll just do it.
But here's a funny thing too. Sorry, I want to stop you real quick, because if you think about like something like gospel chops that comes directly out of the church, of course, the black church, right, where there is, you know, arguably a little bit more hipness. I mean, those guys are playing their asses off, not leaving any stone unturned on any given Sunday.
And I say, and I'm relating these experiences, knowing full well that they're mine. There are a lot of other people's, but they're mine. The fact is, some of the pushback that I got, some of the, you know, back and forth and all of that kind of stuff, all the life experiences that I summed together to put me in that position where I finally said goodbye. It's not every church. It's not every denomination. There's 50,000 Protestant denominations in the world.
Yeah.
You know, and one Catholic church. But
maybe they've got it right.
Yeah. Don't get into that.
Well, here's a philosophical thing, and man, I hope people are sticking with us. Yeah, here people are sticking with. You know, going through, you know, this philosophical or this philosophy course that I'm doing or was doing, finished. There was this one point where they said, okay, if you take the 5 major religions, just take the 5, of which, you know, like in terms of religion, there's thousands, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, but the top 5.
The big 5, yeah.
And there are 2 sects of each of those major religions, right? So there's Protestant and Catholic. There's, well, whatever, Sunni and Shia, right? You see where it's right. So there's 10, right? Well, the ideology is that one of them have it right, and that 9 of them have it wrong. So if I'm your friend, we are friends, but if I'm your friend, and I lie to you 9 times out of 10, how apt are you to believe me on the 10th time or not believe me?
Probably not very likely to believe you.
Exactly. And so that, philosophically speaking, that was a big smack for me. You know, when I realized, if I had a friend that lied to me 9 out of 10 times, I don't think I would believe him on the 10th. So how do I know that he's got it right? I can never know that he's right. Yeah.
Absolutely not. The quick answer to that is that's what faith is. Faith is not about knowing. Faith is about believing, right?
Right, but if my friend that lied to me 9 out of 10 times said you just have to have faith, I'd say, no,
I mean, don't get me wrong. Your faith doesn't necessarily have to be very high. Right. You could be at an all-time low in the 10th time, and you would be perfectly justified in being there.
Right.
But, I mean, faith taken by itself in what you believe is something that's, you know, personal to you. It doesn't demand to be proven, and that's problematic in and of itself. But religion, on the other hand, demands loyalty. It demands
loyalty without evidence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My faith allows me to question what I'm seeing. Religion doesn't really do that in a lot of ways for a lot of people. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people, especially evangelical religion. You know, like churches, because you know it's a societal construct that's built out of so many things that have just kind of come together and congealed in this giant fucking mass that looks like nothing. Looks nothing like it did at the beginning, right? So I have absolutely no love whatsoever for religion, none whatsoever. But I still have faith. It's different faith. It's not the same kind of faith it's not the same kind of faith that purely is taught as faith in the churches that I came from. And I mean, as I realized that about myself, I realized something that, I see so many times people claiming to be atheist because they spent, they grew up in the church and it fucked them up and they left the church and now they're atheists. It's like, are you atheist? Do you believe there is no God? Or are you just so mad at the human construct of religion and you're rejecting that? Because it's perfectly okay to reject any and all religion.
Right, I think agnosticism is probably the best place that a person can sit.
If it's the latter, you're probably agnostic.
Right, because not believing in God is the same as believing in God, in the sense that you have to know that it doesn't exist, and you can't know that it doesn't exist, just like you can't know it does.
Yeah, exactly. Because
right?
And I mean, it's even a little bit of a more tenuous position to be in because you just can't prove a negative. Right. An atheist position, generally speaking, is God does not exist.
Right.
There is no God, and that's fine if you want to hold that as a philosophical belief on your part, or as a tenet of your, of who you are and part of your identity. That's perfectly okay. I would encourage you not to be a dick about it, but if that's how you feel about it, that's perfectly okay. But at the end of the day, you don't know.
Well, that's the humility in all of it. For the religious or the unreligious, non-religious, the atheist in this sense. Although I think even atheism is changing its definition more to a sense of agnosticism more than anything else.
I honestly don't know about that.
Yeah, it seems to me like I used to watch this show called The Atheist Experience, and a lot of times what they were talking about was agnosticism. I forget the guy's name. Genius, motherfucker, this guy. And he basically was saying, well, it's an agnostic approach because nobody can define it. The only thing about not being able to define it, which was the most freeing thing for me, was just that. It was the freedom from not having to try and answer the question anymore. Does God exist? Doesn't he exist? What does he expect of me? Blah, blah, blah. All that pressure, that I feel that religion or religion itself comes with, that you have to know the answer. Well, how can I know the answer? Like, if I can't tell you the composition of a rock, how can I tell you the composition of the one that made it? It doesn't seem to follow rational thinking. That if I can't tell you what is small, how can I tell you what's big?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, Christians love to say absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But but
that's true.
And they're absolutely right.
Yes.
But I can also use that exact same expression to justify why I have nothing to do with your little religion anymore.
Exactly. But that's the problem.
Because if you really accept that phrase, then all of a sudden there's a whole new fucking world out there for you to explore.
Exactly. But we know that, as guys that have experienced religion, that is a hard thing to extricate yourself from. The fear of not knowing is too much fear.
There's comfort in a rock solid faith in something, despite the fact that you may not be able to articulate the details about it. Right. You know what I mean? Like, there's comfort in that because you feel like you belong. You feel like you're taken care of. You feel like you don't have to worry about the shit. If you don't have that, then there's potential for fear to start creeping up into your life and all that shit, right?
Well, and that's the thing. Until you're met with a shit greater than the shit you believe, you probably won't do anything about it. It's only until something is challenged so voraciously like faith and like mine was, that I had to come to terms with what I believed. And the fact that it could be possible that what I believed was detrimental to my, at least my carbon footprint of life. And so once I realized that, I started to ask myself some very hard questions. And what does that do? I mean, that puts you out into no man's land. You know what I mean? I mean, you're like a spaceman, you know, going through. Didn't you feel some of that?
A little bit, but also to your point, I mean, I kind of approached it as, you know, I lived in a construct that had more answers than a lot of people who don't. You know, I don't want to say that they had all the answers, because nobody has all the answers, and churches and people of great faith like that will also admit that. But there was a lot of areas of life where they were, you know, where the philosophy and where the construct demanded a lot more of a rock solid answer to some of these questions. And
can you give me an example? I'm curious.
Well, just, you know what, in very broad strokes, just straight up the existence of God.
Right.
You know, just in a very generalized sense, right?
Well, or the existential questions of why are we here?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
All that kind of stuff, right? You go out away from a construct and from a scenario like that, and you don't have those answers anymore. But I didn't feel pressure to go and find the answers. You know, I didn't have to come to some hard truths about myself. I just kind of said, okay, well, see what happens tomorrow.
Because you felt like you had a good enough foundation.
Yeah, because I mean, I had a foundation. I knew where I stood, and that was enough for me to want to see what comes.
Sure.
You know, and so far nothing has come, and it's been years.
You mean to buffet the decision, whether it was a decision or not, to kind of extricate yourself and to move away. Yeah. I mean, the answers, I don't know that I'll ever get the answers. Well, I don't think you can.
I don't think you can get the answers.
Well, I shouldn't say that. I believe that we can get the answers to many things.
Yeah.
But that won't be anywhere from 1,000 to 100,000 years.
Yeah. I think there's something detrimental and something kind of soulless about doggedly pursuing something with such obsession. You know, and that statement may run afoul of some of the more hardcore students of music, but I mean, there's a lot more to life than being so ultra focused, tunnel visioned about one particular thing. And I didn't want to get myself into a position where I was that, and I didn't want to get myself into a position where I felt like I was missing out because I wasn't like that. And I felt like something had passed me by, or I felt like I had missed something critical or anything like that. So my ultimate kind of takeaway was, okay, we'll see what happens tomorrow.
Well, and if you know, it depends on what you talk about too, right? Like if you talk about music and pursuits, and, you know, maybe somebody wants to pursue philosophy. Like for me, you know, I went very hard after practicing. I mean, I practiced 3 hours a day, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, on 2 different occasions for 6 years at a time.
Yeah.
So 12 years, really, in total, I practiced that much.
Yeah.
Now, some of that could have come more from a place of unhealthy, an unhealthy mind.
Yeah.
Let's just say it like that. That pursuit, that doggedness, right? At the same time, I think part of it was healthy. It's to know what part of that is healthy, and maybe your motivation in pursuing something, you know, to question yourself.
I was going to say that's ultimately it. You got to look at why you're doing it. There's nothing wrong with pursuit of something. There's nothing wrong with elevating yourself and your abilities and your thinking and your relationships and all that kind of stuff. Pursuing that kind of stuff, absolutely not. Do it. But you really got to be cognizant of where it's coming from. But if you don't, at the same time, if you don't care about where it's coming from, if you're just looking at the end goal, fucking do it, right? But I mean, if you're at all kind of curious, you got to be wondering where that motivation comes from. And if that motivation ultimately ends up being wholly selfish and like self-centered entirely, that's okay. I would think that it's better that you know that about yourself, because...
Well, I think it would be better to know it. But here's the thing, is that I don't think there can be any judgment either way, because, well, number one, I mean, I'm glad Vinny, is as mindful as he is towards the instrument. I'm glad Weckl is, Erskine is, I mean, Baby Dodds and all the guys, man. For me, starting to realize, what was that motivation and everything else? There was nothing, well, there were parts of it, I think, that were unhealthy and things that, some hard questions that I had to ask. When I started realizing this, and, especially this was around COVID, just slightly before, I started to take a look at my motivations, right? I started to take a look at my life. And that's when I pulled the trigger on this.
Yeah.
On doing these interviews. I think there comes a time where you go, is this thing that I'm doing working for me? Can I make it work on a part-time basis? The questions are legion that one might ask. Yeah. If you come to a place where you just can't give it up and it is necessarily destroying your life, or it is making you bitter because you're not getting to the place you feel you should get, which is just another question about industry and commerce and everything else itself.
That's a whole other kettle of fish. Right?
Yeah. Then, and that's what I started to take a look at. Is it serving me the best way it can? And when I didn't say goodbye to my drums, but I did say au revoir. And when I did that, I felt, and of course I mean this not in audible terms, I'm not crazy, but it's like my drum said, dude, we'll always be here. You're not leaving us. You're pursuing your life. Go, do it, and be excited. And that was such a, I don't know, just a moment of freedom for me, to know that, well, my drums aren't going to judge me. And you know what I mean? And if they don't judge me, then people can't. And I don't know, that just really meant something to me.
No, absolutely. On a personal level. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I mean, for me, it ended up back in this path. I didn't necessarily walk away. I'm glad I didn't walk away. But yeah, it's ultimately, it's the same question, right? Like, it's the same thought process. It's the same conclusion that you draw about yourself, because everybody's life experiences and what everybody wants out of who they want to be is so vastly different,
Right.
That, you and I can start off asking the same question of ourselves. And we can go down a lot of those same paths trying to get to the answer, but still arrive at completely different destinations. That's just basic chaos theory, right?
Do you think, let me ask you this, because this is, it just kind of snaps into my mind when you're talking about this. Do you think, I mean, we're struggling a lot, not you and I necessarily, humanity, the planet, seems to be struggling a lot these days. Would you agree?
No.
No?
No, I mean, there's struggle, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But we're doing pretty good compared to a lot of the rest of human history. So, war and violence is at an all-time low, at this point in history, and has been for decades and decades. World wars notwithstanding. And I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're struggling with, is not new. Empires reach their apex and decline, and then eventually go away. It's been happening for centuries. All this kind of stuff has happened before, because that's what human beings do. They say that, the quickest way to repeat history is to not learn from it. Well, we repeat history a lot.
We sure do.
You know,
meaning we don't learn that well.
The implication being we don't learn from it. Yeah. Now, in a lot of ways, you know, it seems like we have. You know, but there's, you know, rumblings, you know, in the world out there right now that indicate that, you know, maybe some of us haven't learned that lesson, you know, some of those lessons as much as we should have. But, you know, are we struggling? Yeah, we're struggling, but are we existentially struggling? No. No, we're not.
When you say there's an empire, or empires, you know, rise up and they collapse, are you saying that because you see that right now, or?
I don't know. I don't necessarily, well, maybe, I mean, I don't want to say yes because I can't back it up. Well, no, sorry, let me backtrack. I don't necessarily want to say yes because it would seem to be a little bit contradictory to what I just said. Because, you know, if you kind of zoom in a little bit, you know, if you look at what I just said as a, you know, 50,000 foot statement, and you zoom in a little bit, you see a lot of that trouble. You know, you see a lot of resentment and a lot of discouragement, and you see a lot of just a lot of that kind of unrest, let's call it.
Okay, so you wouldn't use the word trouble.
Okay, yeah, trouble. Let's okay, sure. Let's.
But no, I don't mind the word unrest at all.
Yeah. But
where is that unrest coming from? Do you think?
I honestly have no idea. I mean, it's impossible to. That is a 120-year-old geopolitical question. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there are so many things that have contributed to the way we live our lives today over the last 120 years.
Yeah, over the last 120,000 years. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, even most, like, humanity has progressed more, technologically speaking, in the last 100 years than we ever have at any point in human history. You know?
Yeah.
There's no question about it.
Absolutely. Can I interject just for a sec?
Yeah.
Because it's not like I disagree with you.
Yeah.
I agree. You know, I mean, we have grown. Certainly, if you take a look at the graph from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to today, it pretty much is a straight line upwards, right? Yeah, boom, right?
Yeah.
I get it, especially in the last 120 years. We have progressed a lot. You know, I don't know if you know who Michio Kaku is.
Nope.
He's the father, in a sense, of string theory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And you know, he's still on that, whether or not that's a thing, or not.
Yeah.
You know, it is still a thing because once again, they can't prove or disprove, right? Yeah, something that I wish, you know, religion and atheists could sit down and talk about. You know, so they haven't dropped string theory, although there's a lot of, and there's some things for it, and there's some things against it, absolutely. But that notwithstanding, with Michio and the kind of guys that he hangs out with, like I hang out with drummers and musicians, he hangs out with other scientists and people that really know their shit in this regard. A lot of them feel, and this was interesting to me, that we are living in a type 0 civilization. So to many scientists, there are 4 types of civilizations, I guess. There's 0, 1, 2, 3. At least this is what they formulated. Now, it's not hyperbole, but it is conjecture in terms of what these may look like, whether or not that's absolutely true or whatever. But if you take it as a theory and no further than that,
let's call it a hypothesis.
Or a hypothesis, right? We are a type 0 moving into a type 1 civilization. What that means more than anything else really is where we get our energy from, right? So our energy right now comes from fossils,
like
plants.
Actual power.
Right, energy. So moving into a type 1 civilization would be, they believe, something like nuclear, or not nuclear, but fusion energy, right? Now, of course, fusion energy can't be contained yet, so so it can't be utilized.
We've been 10 years away from a breakthrough for the last 40 years, so.
Right. And we'll continue. You know, these scientists are talking in the next 100 years, 150 years. Even Ray Kurzweil, the guy that, you know, built the piano. you know, he's very involved and very steeped in well, especially the singularity, meaning when computers merge with humans, right? Which he believes 2030, and I think maybe he's a little.
No,
I think his timeline is a little, which a lot of other people do as well.
A little optimistic.
Yeah, a little optimistic, but certainly not beyond the realm of comprehension. Right. The same thing with a type 0 to a type 1. It's not beyond the realm of comprehension that this could exist. And that coming from better sources than a drummer. To get there would mean, in part, energy, where we get our energy from and what those sources are, and they would be necessarily more renewable and things like that. And the other part of it is to exist or to survive into a type 1 civilization.
You mean the transition?
The transition, let's call it the eye of the needle.
I was going to say, that would be harder than the science.
Type 0 to type 1 would be the hardest transition to make. It would necessarily be the eye of the needle. And if, you know, as I've sort of philosophically thought about it, it's not, the eye of the needle, as we know, was a gate that a camel went through. Right? We know this, you and I. We know that. But in order for that camel to go through the eye of the needle, which was the name of the gate, you would have to strip the camel of everything. You would have to climb through yourself and then pull with everything you had to get the camel through. And then you could re-satchel him or whatever, and on you go. To bring ourselves through the eye of the needle into a type 1 civilization. To me, that seems to be the struggle. It seems to be one of ideology, politics, religion, human rights.
So, yeah. To take it back to your analogy. Camel through the eye of a needle. You got to strip it down of everything, and you got to fight like hell to get it through, and then you put it back together afterwards. After that struggle, and after everything that happens, the camel is the same as it was before. So then, if you extrapolate that to this transition from a fossil fuel based energy civilization and society to something that's more sustainable and cleaner and a lot more abundant, we're still going to have the same social, political, religious struggles on the other side of that, and in fact there's probably and in fact they're going to be compounded. Because the transition is not going to be a transition. It's going to be decades and decades and decades and centuries of transition.
I would agree with you that there is a transition through time. That if it's possible, things will change through that epoch. Right? It's sort of like what we're learning about. Well, think about it. Think about the Salem witch trials. We know better now that that wasn't the devil. Right? Okay, maybe it was.
No, I'm not saying it was. I'm saying, do we know better?
Well, no, I mean, we're not doing that this way in this extent. Once again, I'm just taking one thing. Like, we know that things now that they would have purported back in the 1700s or whatever would have been demonic in nature. They would have been spiritual in nature. We know better now scientifically that those, whatever that was that these women and men were exhibiting was not necessarily the devil. It might have been some form of whatever. Right, whatever, some psychological bent. But we also know that that would have come from the people that tried to make them float and burn them at the stake, right? That they also would have suffered from a psychological bent. The moving into these civilizations would have everything to do with getting to know our humanity better, our, what would you call it, our biology better, the brain better, these kind of things. And I'm talking through time, though. I'm not talking like tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm talking in the next 100,000 years of humanity. Well, no, but think about it.
If we're lucky enough.
If we're lucky enough, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Because the reason why I kind of think we're not is because I want to give you some listening material when you say that, when you bring up the Salem witch trials specifically. Behind the Bastards. Okay, it's a long-running series of podcasts about just getting kind of in-depth into some of the most horrible people in history. It's fascinating, and it's very well researched, and it's very in-depth. He typically does 2-part series. You know, sometimes more, sometimes it's only one, but most often it's a 2-part series on a specific topic. Look at the history of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Oh, sure. I sort of know it. I played for them a lot.
Yeah, no. You're probably going to see a lot of familiarities there. Obviously, because you did.
In a sense, though, then you would have to agree that we are struggling, that we are still struggling the way we did, let's say, in the Salem witch trials. Yeah. I would disagree with that, because in some ways, I think we're struggling more. Number one, you know, if we talk about the existential crisis, to me, an existential crisis would have something to do with something that could destroy the whole planet.
Yeah, I was going to say, in that context, existential crisis usually is a world-ending event.
Right. Yeah. And we know that in history, at least back in the Salem witch trials and prior, and leading up until 1945 or 44, we didn't have that potential. But we do have that potential today.
No, we don't.
We don't have...
no, I'm not saying we don't. I'm just saying
I mean, the physical nature exists. I'm not saying that the mentality does.
Yeah, no.
We could debate that.
I'm just saying. Yeah, okay. Let's say Let's say for the sake of argument, yes.
Yeah, just the potential of it exists. That's all I'm saying. Plutonium exists, right? So we would say that. Now, whether the mentality is any different, well, there is, you know, there is a contradiction, let's say, in the fact that if we're still thinking like the Salem witch trials, well, then that existential crisis could be a crisis. You know, plutonium could be used for these nefarious purposes. Now, would an individual do that? You know, I had this...
Are you saying that the mentality was such during those times and during that hysteria that if people had the means, they would have nuked? No, because, well, yes and no. Yeah. I'm saying no because the Salem witch trials weren't global. They were kind of barely a blip. But
yeah, but I'm just using them as an example, right? Yeah. But now we do have globalism. Now we do, you know what I mean? Things are globalized. And we do have these problems. Now, I am certainly not nihilistic about this because I believe that human beings are better than that. Ultimately, I think that we can become better than that. Let me say it that way. I'm not saying that we will. I'm saying that we could. I'm not saying that we will. Well, but I can't, right? I can't. Exactly. I'm not a prophet. All I am is someone who can observe. That's all I can do, right?
You could have faith that we will.
Right, but no, more than faith, because I do believe. Now, this is a belief. This is once again. I do believe in a certain. In the possibility of civilizations. You know, as a matter of fact, Michio goes on a lot, and y'all can look him up too. He's a pretty fascinating dude, and he's a scientist. He's not, you know, a nut necessarily, although I don't know him personally.
He might very well be crazy as a
he could be, crazy as a fucking loon. I don't know. But, you know, he does talk about the potential that Type 3 civilizations already exist in the universe. And so, you know, but he's very careful to say could, and use that word very strongly, could. He's not saying there is. He's saying that given, you know, the progression of science, or the progressive nature of civilizations and how they could progress, it is possible. So if I take that approach, I think, well, if another civilization that wasn't that much different from ours made it from 0 to 1, then we can, not that we will. And so I think that's, and you and I talk about these sorts of things all the time. Do you have anything to say about that?
I was going to say, certainly the potential is there for a group to make a transition like that. Absolutely. I believe it 100%. Where I get hung up a little bit is, you say, you had said that, you believe we can be better. I believe more strongly that a human being can be better. But when you scale humans up into large numbers, we kind of turn into a bunch of assholes. And we have for all of history. And there is absolutely nothing to indicate that that is going to change at any point in time. In fact, I would say that that would probably get a lot worse if we did make the technological shift like you're talking about, from an energy utilization perspective.
Right.
If tomorrow they said, we got fusion, we got nuclear fusion, it's clean, it's abundant, it's everywhere, no more need for oil, that industry is going to go down kicking and screaming, and it's going to hurt. So you know what I mean? Like,
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So it's, I have more faith in a person than I do in people, I guess is what I'm saying.
Which person?
Any person.
So you're just talking individuals more than collectives. Yeah. So when you say that,
that's why armies work so well.
That's why
armies work so well.
Because
people will do stuff in an army.
Yeah.
They'll do the absolute worst and be the absolute worst person they could be in an army in a way that they never would on their own.
On their own. Well, right. Vietnam and a lot of the stories, right? And a lot of those guys, I've seen documentaries where those guys have, just broken down bawling about the things they've seen or done. So, here's the thing. This is a fascinating conversation for me, because to me, this feels really honest. Y'all aren't in the room right now, but there is and I get that, but there is a palpable feeling of transparency here at the moment.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate that. This is why I'm having these conversations, because, like I said, I think I said to Doug Wong, to Frederick, to Maggie, and to other people, I believe in artists, because I believe that we're more intuitive, we're smarter, we care more. We are the sensitive ones.
Yeah.
Not only that, but music and art and entertainment were the first things to go when COVID hit. And they are kind of the last bastion to come back.
To come back to the levels they were, but I was doing stuff, as soon as we got any kind of leeway to do stuff, we were out doing it.
Yeah.
So in the sense, it's taken the longest to come back fully, but it was also one of the first things that could come back when we had the opportunity, as little as it did.
Very true, and that's another reason that this podcast exists, is because I care so much about the civic nature of music. And one of the biggest reasons I care about it is because, I think the music industry, being an industry, has become extremely commodified, and therefore bastardized to a degree. To what degree is another debate, but it has. It has. I want to get back to that civic nature of music, to the teaching of the young, to the proliferation of art on a civic level, and then on a construction that is maybe national and international. I think there's a way to do that, and I have described that in other podcasts. I won't describe it today, but I believe that it's possible. And when I see, not only that, but when I see my brothers and sisters, I see you out there playing. I get to stand beside you, excuse me, in delirium and play, and we get to play our asses off, even sometimes if I'm difficult. Yeah, I know. We'll have another podcast just on that. But I love that feeling, you know, of that camaraderie, of that togetherness, of musicians collaborating and doing great shit. And we do. I mean, there's good players in that band, man. Yeah, and great arrangers and great writers, and you know. And I'm not saying that they're the only band. That happens all over town. All over the place. Yeah. And so I'm really focused on that these days. You know, I think, too, probably my age, you know, and the fact that this goes back to the reasons why I pursued music. You know, why was I pursuing it? And, you know, the one thing that I didn't think necessarily healthy was the fact that I was getting upset that I wasn't getting what I felt I deserved. But then I took a look at, why do I feel like I deserve it? Where is that coming from? And what is the construction? Is that thing that I want to achieve, that brass ring, is it really not just Golem's? You know what I mean? Is it there to help me or to hurt me? And so I dropped it. And but I do believe in the you and me. You know, and all y'all out there. No, that's great. I'm gonna slap that in too. I appreciate you, brother, so much. Like, you have no idea. You know, your mind and the way that you and I have talked. You know. Has been so enriching for me, and in some ways enlightening for me as well. And so,
and I feel the same way. I mean, I don't get into these kind of discussions with just anybody,
right?
You know,
right?
So, and I mean, I enjoy them too, right?
Well, and you have so much good shit to say. And you know, whether or not this was all about music or not, it's about us. And once again, I will come back to my belief anyway that musicians are more sensitive, intuitive. They have some answers. I thank you all for joining me today, and Dave. And be well. Treat each other well. I think it starts there. And I'm doing another one of these. I'll be back probably in a week. You all stay safe. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Gavin.
All right, man.
Talk to you soon, folks.
Bye.
Bye.
Man, that was good. That was very good.
That was fun.
Thank you so much.
No problem. That was super fun.
Yeah.